The sealed envelope, King Charles's final command that changed everything. Welcome back to the Royal Crown Diaries. Today, we are going to tell you a story that begins with a sealed envelope and ends with the entire future of the British monarchy being rewritten in a single afternoon. This is not a story about public speeches or grand ceremonies. This is a story about what happens behind closed doors. What happens in a room where titles stop meaning anything and raw human emotion takes over completely. It begins with Princess Anne, and it ends with a choice King Charles made long before he ever had to say goodbye. Stay with us, because this one changes everything. Every monarchy carries secrets. Some are kept for decades, some are buried completely, but occasionally a secret becomes so important that it must be written down, sealed, and placed in the hands of exactly the right person. King Charles did exactly that. Before the final chapter of his reign closed, he wrote a private instruction, not a general note, not a casual wish, a formal, documented command. And he chose Princess Anne to hold it. Why Anne? Because Anne has never chased attention. She has never played politics inside the family. She has never bent the truth to protect someone's feelings or preserve her own position. She is the one royal who, when asked to carry something difficult, simply carries it. No drama, no negotiation, no delay. Charles knew that when the moment came, the people in that room would be overwhelmed by grief, by ambition, by fear, and by family loyalty. He needed someone who would cut through all of that and simply deliver the truth. So he gave the envelope to his sister. When the time came, Anne called a private family briefing inside Windsor Castle. The purpose was simple: to control uncertainty before uncertainty could control the family. And she opened the seal in front of all of them. Let us take you inside that room, because what happened there tells you more about this family than any public appearance ever could. William sat with his jaw tight. The shock reached his eyes before he could stop it. Because there is a vast difference between knowing one day you will be king and hearing your father's final written command tell you that the time has already begun. One is a distant idea. The other is a door closing behind you. Catherine sat beside him with her head slightly lowered. Not from weakness. Anyone who has watched Catherine over the years knows she is not a weak person. She lowered her gaze because she understood immediately what those words were going to cost her family. The quiet, private life she had carefully protected for her children was about to become significantly harder to hold on to. And then there was Camilla. The Queen Consort did not move at first. She sat perfectly still. And then, slowly, her hand tightened around the arm of her chair. It was a small gesture, but in a room full of people trained to control every expression, a small gesture says everything. Camilla had not known the full force of what Charles had written. She had not expected Anne to read it so plainly, without pause, without softening the language. And as she looked across the room at William and Catherine, the silence between them became heavier than any direct accusation. Charles had not placed his deepest trust in marital comfort. He had not written a careful, balanced message designed to keep everyone at peace. He had written something that pointed clearly and firmly in one direction, toward William and Catherine. When Anne finished reading and lowered the pages, the damage had already become destiny. So what did Charles say? He did not simply write that William and Catherine would one day inherit the throne. Every informed person in Britain already understood that. What Charles wrote was different. He wrote that they must become the monarchy's necessary next chapter. Not eventually, not when the time feels right. Now. Because they had already been carrying the institution in spirit long before they would ever carry it in name. That is a very specific and very deliberate choice of language. Charles was not handing them a future. He was telling them they had already become it. and he was using his final written authority to make that recognition official. The question immediately filling the room was this: why? Why now? Why Anne? Why so formal? Why not a private conversation? Why not a softer handover? The answer, it turns out, was connected to a single afternoon on the Windsor balcony. And once Anne revealed that connection, the full picture finally became impossible to avoid. There had been a public unity ceremony at Windsor, the kind of occasion designed to project strength and calm to the watching nation. Flags, military formations, the full ceremonial display. But something went wrong. A young page, a boy caught under the enormous weight of the crowd's attention and the pressure of the ceremony, froze. He simply stopped. And in a formal military procession, one person stopping creates a chain reaction that can unravel the entire formation in full public view. Before anyone could step in, William moved. Quietly, quickly, with complete calm. He guided the disrupted line back into order without drawing attention to the mistake and without embarrassing the child. Catherine saw the boy's face. She saw the fear there, and she responded not with protocol but with genuine human warmth. She protected his dignity in front of thousands of people. She made him feel safe when the weight of the occasion had become too heavy for him. And then she carried on, as if compassion had always been part of the ancient ceremony. Because for her, it genuinely is. Charles watched all of it. He saw his son handle a moment of public pressure with the exact quiet authority a king needs. No panic, no performance, just steady, instinctive leadership. And he saw his daughter-in-law protect a vulnerable child with a grace that no amount of royal training can teach. You either have that quality or you do not. Catherine has always had it. That evening, Charles had a private conversation with Anne, and he told her flatly that the balcony had shown him the future of the monarchy. He told her to remember it if he could not repeat the words himself. Anne remembered. Here is something that is easy to miss in this story. Watching his son look completely ready for kingship did not make Charles feel reassured. It hurt him because it meant William had become the future before Charles had fully released the present. It is one of the most difficult things a parent can experience. The moment you look at your child and realize they no longer need you to lead them, they are already leading. Charles carried that private pain alongside his admiration. He understood why the public trusted William and Catherine. He knew exactly why that trust mattered. And he also knew why certain people within his own family found that rising trust uncomfortable. Camilla had reportedly questioned whether William and Catherine's growing popularity had become politically dangerous within the family. Charles had heard that comment, and he had carried it with him as he made his final decisions about who to trust and how to leave the monarchy in the best possible shape. That background is what makes the sealed envelope make complete sense. Charles was not acting out of sentiment alone. He was acting out of calculation. Cold, careful, deeply human calculation. Here is where the story becomes even more significant. When Anne finished reading the first document, there was a second sealed folder sitting on the table, and the atmosphere in the room shifted again. William saw Anne's eyes move toward it. He asked whether their father had written this after one specific moment. Anne did not answer immediately. Her silence said more than words could have. The second folder was not emotional. It was operational. It contained transition instructions, explicit written directions for how royal duties, authority, and public responsibilities would begin moving from one generation to the next. And it divided responsibilities clearly. Anne was named as the keeper of the king's command, the person who would ensure his final wish was carried out without compromise. William was to chair a private transition council immediately, a small, trusted inner group designed to guide sensitive decisions before they reach the wider household. Catherine was given direct, independent influence over public-facing priorities. The causes, the appearances, the human-facing side of the monarchy that shapes how ordinary people feel about the crown. Camilla's name appeared in the document only in ceremonial terms, connected to formal, symbolic appearances, completely separated from the deeper work of strategy and transition. She had not been erased, but she had been thoroughly contained. Before long, the confrontation that had been building since the first seal was broken could no longer be avoided. Anne and Camilla met privately. No aides, no ceremonial language, no one left to interrupt. Camilla asked the question directly. Why had she not been trusted with the king's final wish? Why had Anne been chosen as the keeper of the instruction while she, his wife, heard the news alongside everyone else? Her voice stayed low, but every word was sharpened by real hurt. She had stood beside Charles through decades of public judgment and silence. She had endured an enormous personal cost to be near the throne, and in a single afternoon inside Windsor Castle, she had been placed at the edge of his final trust. Anne did not offer soft language. She told Camilla plainly that Charles had never doubted her loyalty. What he doubted was the pressure. He feared that love, guilt, and fear would crowd around the instruction before it could reach the people it was meant for. He needed someone who would simply execute the wish without negotiating it first. Then Camilla asked about the second folder. Did it place limits on her future? Anne's silence was its own answer. Before they could step into the role Charles had placed in front of them, William and Catherine needed one moment alone. Not as future king and queen, not as public symbols, as a husband and wife. William closed the door of a private room, and the noise of the palace disappeared. He spoke first, not with the composure of a future monarch, but with the raw honesty of a son. He told her that he was afraid, not of the responsibility in the abstract, but of arriving at the throne through the doorway of grief rather than readiness, of being pushed forward by his father's final command before he felt ready to move. Catherine did not rush to comfort him. She let him finish, because she understood that some fears need to be spoken out loud before they can be carried properly. Then she gave him the truth without decoration. Becoming queen, she told him, was not simply a title. It meant becoming the public face of steadiness, the person expected to remain completely calm when your private life is cracking behind closed doors. It meant surrendering parts of yourself permanently, parts of your private world that you would never fully recover. William took her hand, not for any camera, not for any audience, as a quiet acknowledgement of what she was agreeing to give up. And then he shared something Charles had once said to him in private. The king had told him that Catherine would steady the crown when tradition alone could no longer hold it up. That sentence changed the room. It made the final command feel less like a burden placed on them and more like a deeply considered judgment that Charles had arrived at after watching them both survive years of pressure. Catherine absorbed those words. Then she gave William the answer that turned an inherited responsibility into a genuine partnership. They would accept it together, she said, or not at all. Part 9. The shift nobody could miss. By the next morning, the change had already begun moving through the palace. Senior staff received quiet orders to prepare a revised royal schedule under William and Catherine's direct authority. A meeting moved rooms. A briefing list was rewritten. A private secretary paused for just a fraction of a second before placing William's name first on the docket. Small signs, but in a world as carefully controlled as the royal household, small signs are enormous ones. Somewhere in the quiet machinery of the palace, the old order exhaled its final breath. Outside, the details reached the public. Front pages, television panels, morning tables across Britain. Crowds outside Buckingham Palace reacted in different ways. Some felt reassured. Some felt that the traditional order had been bypassed before its time. But the message was absolute. The future had arrived before the crown had formally changed hands. Camilla watched commentators shift their focus entirely toward the young couple. She understood what that meant. Public attention becomes real political power faster than any formal document. The transition was not just institutional, it was happening in the minds of an entire nation. Let us step back for a moment and take in the full picture. King Charles made several extraordinary choices in his final command. He chose his sister over his wife to carry the most important instruction of his reign. Not because he loved Anne more, but because he understood the difference between personal love and institutional trust. He needed someone who would not soften the message when the room became emotional. Anne was that person. He chose to give William operational authority immediately, not symbolically. This was not a kind gesture from a proud father. This was a king ensuring that the next generation had real power from the first day, so that the transition would be stable rather than uncertain. He chose to give Catherine independent public authority, not as a supporting figure alongside her husband, as a leader in her own right, responsible for the human face of the monarchy. That is a remarkable acknowledgement of what she has already been doing for years, and a formal recognition that her value to the institution is not simply as a princess, but as a communicator, a protector of dignity, and a steady presence that ordinary people trust. And he chose to contain Camilla's role to ceremony, not to punish her, but because Charles understood something that the palace will never say publicly. The next chapter of the monarchy needs to be built on the foundation of public trust. And that trust, in this particular moment, lives with William and Catherine. Part 11. The lesson this story teaches. Empires are not broken by public scandals. They are broken by the wrong people holding the wrong authority at the wrong moment. Charles saw that risk clearly. He had spent years watching public trust in the monarchy shift. He had watched his own reign carry the weight of complicated history. He had watched William and Catherine build something the institution had not had for a long time. Genuine warmth, genuine public connection, real grace under real pressure. He made his final decision accordingly. The monarchy did not collapse under the weight of this revelation. It found the shape of its tomorrow. Anne protected it with her silence until the right moment came. William accepted it with fear and honesty and the courage to admit that some burdens are too heavy to carry without admitting their weight. Catherine steadied it with truth rather than easy comfort, and Camilla survived the pain of hearing it with the dignity that has always defined her public life, even in its most difficult chapters. This is what royal transitions actually look like. Not in the photographs, not in the official statements, in sealed envelopes, in rooms that fall silent, in hands that tighten around chair arms, in couples standing alone in private rooms, holding on to each other before they walk back into the weight of history. That is the story of King Charles's final command, a story about trust, about power, about what a father really wants to leave behind for his children, and about the very human cost of carrying a crown. If this is your first time here at the Royal Crown Diaries, welcome. We cover the real stories behind the royal family, the moments the cameras barely catch, and the decisions that shape the monarchy long after the ceremonies are over. If you found this story as extraordinary as we did, please share it with someone who loves the royals. And leave us a comment telling us which part of today's story surprised you most. We read every single one. We will see you in the next chapter.